Okay, good morning. Hemshech Beis. We are in the pages 1155 through 1157, but we're learning now Tzaddik Dalet, Tafresh Tzaddik Dalet, page 120. So which corresponds with the Ayin Beis I just referred to. So, where are we? We're discussing the Ayin be'emtza, the Ayin, the Oyer, which is bittel. Ayin is bittel, a state of like a transition state interface between the Yesh Amiti and the Yesh Nivra. This Ayin divides, as we know, into two. And the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, like a good interface, that reflects and expresses what the source, the producer, God wants to express. And the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is the divine energy as it relates to and is tailored to shape and create and shape existence. These two Ayin have very different meaning. One means absolutely nullified and insignificant because the only true reality is Atzmus. So the true Yesh Amiti is Atzmus, is the creator. And everything below it, the Ayin, is a completely nullified, insignificant compared to Atzmus. Ayin of the Yesh Nivra has a different meaning. You can't call it insignificant. It means it's not of substance. The Yesh Nivra is the Yesh, because it senses itself as an existent reality. And the Ayin is not of that same substance, not of the same matter that Yesh is made of. And it's also not understood, and therefore we call it Ayin. Then we went on to say that these two perspectives, the Das Elyon, Das Tachten. Das Elyon is the perspective from above. That Atzmus, the creator, is the Yesh Amiti. And everything below it is Ayin. The Ayin Amiti is Ayin. And the other way around, the perspective from below, Das Tachten, is the creation's perspective. We exist, and then there's some mysterious Ayin, some mysterious unknown and not of the same substance force that is the creative force that creates us. That this Das and Das Tachen is in the Oyer itself as well. Kel Deus Havaya, in Havaya, which is the level of Oyer, as the Frierdiker Rebbe explained, there's these two perspectives. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti sees it the same way that Atzmus sees it, meaning from the top down. That not only that God sees that the Oyer is Ayin, the Ayin itself, the Oyer itself feels and senses that it is insignificant. In other words, the Oyer itself is a state of bittul. And the second level, Das Tachten, is the way the second level of Ayin sees it, which we'll discuss later. So right now, we've been discussing this level of Ayin, of Oyer. The highest levels of Oyer, it's the state of bittul. And we said that there are different levels in this bittul itself. We'll be talking about four different efanim, four different ways, four different levels of bittul. Starting from the bottom up, the first one is called Heder Tfisas Mokim. We're not talking about the entity itself, but in its presence of something greater than it, it feels no sense of self. It's batel, like a flame, a candle in the light of the sun, like Keser, which is Ucham, dark, in the presence of Ilus HaIlus, the cause of all causes. So, as we'll learn a little later, this is not a bittul in the Oyer itself, meaning the Oyer itself is a state of being. But in the presence and feeling the presence of its source, it is nullified because of that. So then he asked the question, how could you say it's nullified? Nullification of this level is in Giluyim itself. One Gilui, one revelation can be nullified to higher revelation, in face of a higher revelation. We're talking about Atzmus that's beyond revelation. And the answer, which is still developing, we still haven't come to the final answer in Tzaddik Dalet. In Ayin Beis, we learned the answer already. The answer, he says, no, we have to understand that Oyer is different than other entities. That though it is infinitely distant from Atzmus, just like Yesh, but that's in its existence, it's infinitely distant, because Atzmus is beyond everything. But the manner which way Atzmus emanates Oyer, the manner it emanates is not b'derech shel ein arech. Because Oyer is a Gilui. Yesh is ein arech also in the way it's created. It's created to be ein arich. It's created to be something that doesn't reveal. All it is about its own self. That's what a yesh is. That's what makes it a yesh. A yesh that ein le ilav siba doesn't feel like it has a cause. Oir is completely aware of a source. It's true. Atzmus is beyond it. But from Oir's point of view, all it is aware that there's a source and is bottled to that source. So we'll soon learn how that can be called Heder Tfisas Makim. But before we get there, he went to explain something, that something is distant, infinitely distant from the source, but the way it manifests is an expression of the source. So at the end of the day, Oir expresses the Giluyim that Wad wants to express. So it's an expressor, not a concealer, basically. Okay. And yet the Yesh teaches us ein arich, that Atzmus is beyond everything, including the Oir. But the Oir is still a revealing force. That's the bottom line. Oir, it creates awareness of the divine. The Yesh will help us understand and experience a divine that's beyond everything. But the mere fact that there's awareness and Gilui, that's what Oir does. So to explain that, he went into the discussion of Ratzon and Seichel. So what's Ratzon and Seichel? In the Keiches HaNefesh, these are two faculties. We shall learn they both are not Etzem HaNefesh. They're both not the core of the soul. They're both distant from the Keiches Atzmim even. Even the core essential faculty as the Nefesh is capable of carrying the faculty. But not yet, there's a difference of how Seichel emerges from there and how Ratzon emerges from there. So first he spoke about Seichel and went to a long discussion of three levels of how faculties develop and emerge from the soul. One is Keiches Atzmim Hiyulin, that's the core potential faculty as it's essentially the soul's power, capacity for intellect, for cognitive thinking, as was written, one of the people wrote in the group. The second level is Keiches Nelomin. They have already now emerged from that capacity of the soul into being a source of cognitive thinking, of intellect. That's called Keiches Nelomin, that's called Koyach HaMaskil. Koyach HaMaskil. And the third level is the actual faculty itself. Now, the faculty itself, he explained, I should rephrase. And there are two ways that intelligence and intellect and cognitive thinking emerges. Two ways that it's generated. One is Yashar, that's direct study. You study something, you learn something, you probe, you try to understand it to the best of your ability, and you get to some, it requires effort. It's drawing from the Koyach HaMaskil into Seichel. It's drawing from the potential, the power that generates ideas to the actual idea and understanding of the idea. A second method is Chezer. That's when you go deeper into the subject through asking questions and contradicting and counter arguments and going further in with more exertion to the point that the whole idea and concept that you initially understood is now full of questions. And then you dig even deeper with even more exertion. We call it Yigiyas HaBasar, Yigiyas HaNefesh, meaning very, very intense exertion, physically and spiritually. And that soulfully, and that digs deeper and discover a completely new level of ideas. And this process continues. That's called Chezer. Because it's a refractive light that comes from the questions. From the darkness, you get the deeper revelation. And that reaches into the Koyach HaAtzmi Heyuli, Koyach Heyuli HaAtzmi of Seichel. Not just the Koyach HaMaskil, which is like is also not Seichel, but it's already considered a source for Seichel, for intellect. Whereas now you're reaching back into where the soul's capacity, and the example of that is like striking the flintstone, where you get the sparks that are not there in any tangible way until you strike it. As opposed to the regular Yosher Seichels, like reaching and fanning a hot coal, that you also draw out a revealed flame, a revealed intelligence, and also takes effort, but it's not quite close to the effort of Hakah, of striking a flintstone. Now, of course, Seichel, from the Koyach HaMaskil even though they're closer to each other, but it still requires striking. It still requires, not striking, I'm sorry, it requires fanning. So there is some effort. So therefore, there's a leap between the seichel and the koyach hamaskil. Because koyach hamaskil is not intelligence. It's not active intellect. It's the power of intellect. And how much more so is the creative idea that emerged, the gili, the seichel goli, the revealed intellect, the revealed cognitive thinking. How far is that from the koyach seichel hayuli ha'atzmi, where you need to strike it? That alone tells you it's coming from a dover nivdo. That means it's not just a regular flow. You need to strike it in order to draw it out. That tells you that it's not, that's he says, that's where seichel is somewhat separate and removed from the etzem. He says it's chutz the etzem nefesh and nivdal from the koyach hamaskil, and even more so from the koyach haseichel hayuli atzmi. Okay, like we see, like in the flame of a coal, it's still not exactly the same level. Here it's hidden in the coal, here it's revealed, but they're closer to each other. When you talk about sparks in the flintstone, like he said, they don't exist even in the flintstone. You cut open a stone, you're not going to find any. You're not going to find any sparks. It's only when you strike it. So therefore, what we've established, therefore, is that seichel is nivdal. Not only its existence is not the soul, but its way of emerging is also through a leap, through striking or through fanning. That means you require some effort. Now we're going to talk about Ratzon. Did we begin with Ratzon? No, that's where we're up to. So we're on page 120. The line begins, Hu al yedei koyach nivdal. But before I continue, since I did a summary now, if anybody wants to ask anything, fine. If not, we'll learn further now. Okay.
It's clear.
Good. Good. So now comes Ratzon. How about Ratzon? Ratzon is another faculty of the soul. But remember, Ratzon is a faculty that is not a localized, specific faculty. It just means, what do you want? If I asked you, what do you want? Means, what does your nefesh want? Seichel, you don't ask, what do you want? Seichel is, already you've determined you want seichel, now you're going to actively pursue seichel. So we learned the process, how seichel, how intellect, and the cognitive system works. Mashenkin koyach harotzen, by contrast, koyach harotzen, the power of desire, of wanting something, shehu koyach ma, she'ena chutz la nefesh. Shehu koyach ma, she'ena chutz la nefesh. It's a koyach that's not outside of the nefesh. As we explained, what means outside? It doesn't mean physically outside. It means it's in the domain of what does the nefesh want. It's an expression of the nefesh. Seichel is a faculty of the nefesh. It's true, it also expresses part of what the capacity of the soul to conceive and understand ideas. But it is a defined element. That's why chutz means, it's like I explained with the chief of staff. The chief of staff is always with the king. That's his role. He's not meant to go out to the field. His role is to convey the instructions of the king to the people or to the heads of every department. The head of, let's say, the military, or the head of the taxation, or the head of the agriculture, or whatever it may be, their role is not to be in the palace. They have to be running the show wherever they are. So just a physical example, but the same idea. Seichel is a function of the soul that needs to focus on its objective, which is to conceive ideas. And these are all things that are outside of the soul. The Ratzon for Seichel is not chutz l'nefesh, but the Seichel is. Same thing, Midas. Whereas Ratzon, he says, is not chutz l'nefesh. He says the word koyach masha in a chutz l'nefesh. Let me just see something. In Ayin Beis, he also says ma. Just want to see the language. The word ma is an interesting word here. Give me a moment. I'm looking at page 1156. Now, that's the Friedrich Rebbe's edition. Okay. Because you could have said, Shul koyach she'ena chutz la nefesh, shul koyach ma. Koyach masha ena chutz lanefesh. A koyach that's not chutz lanefesh. Adarabah, on the contrary, who is pashtus hanefesh. Not only is it not some function outside of the nefesh itself, it's actually an extension of the nefesh. Now, when I say extension, it doesn't mean it is an extension of the soul per se. The soul is an entity that has many elements to it. It gives life. It's a it's a divine force. But the Ratzon, what is the role of Ratzon? From the Ratzon's point of view, all it is an expression. Pashtus means expression or extension of the nefesh. Like Eir HaShemesh. Eir HaShemesh, we're not talking about if the sun, for example, through its light has the power to I'm just trying to think what kind of power, to make something grow. Because within the light, there's a certain type of ultraviolet elements that help the vegetation grow. That's a function. But the light itself, sunlight, that carries everything the sun transmits, all it is hispastus ha-shemesh. It's not the shemesh, but all it is hispastus ha-shemesh. Now, it's not a perfect example because the sunlight is outside of the sun technically, but there's also light within the sun, which we're going to learn about later, not relevant right now. But point being is that compared to a particular function, it's hispastus ha-nefesh. That's what he calls it. Harelezu bulvad. Now, this ratzon, which is not outside of, but it's an extension or expression of. Now, harelezu bulvad, not only the gilui haretzenus marotzen hem be'efon achem mekamoi gili hasichlim mekeach hamaskil. Not only is it that the way that there's the expression or the giluim, the manifestation of different desires that come from the rotzen of the nefesh, that they're different. Their manner is different than the way seichel is revealed from the koyach hamaskil. So let me explain what that means. If seichel is a particular idea, let's say 2 + 2 = 4, or let's use a Torah idea. Shnayim egzim betalis, ze'emer kulishali, ze'emer kulishali. So then you have to v'achleiku. They divide it. It's a seichel of the Gemara, of Torah. It's an idea. That idea originated in the koyach hamaskil. Koyach hamaskil is the place that ideas are generated from. So he's saying different ideas as they emerge from the seichel, koyach hamaskil rather, are different than different ritzenis that emerge from the koyach harotzen. The koyach harotzen is the power of desire. Now there can be many different desires. Go back to the king and the chief of staff. It can be the desire he wants to speak. The king wants to convey a message to the people. Another desire, he wants to give them all a tax break. Another, all kinds of different things that they're saying. So different ritzenis that come from the koyach harotzen, he says, it's different than the gilui haseichel that come from the koyach hamaskil. So he says, besides that obviously still doesn't tell us how different they are. It just tells us they're different. Now, why is it different? Because a seichel is a specific idea. 2 + 2 is 4, or lahavdul shnayim egzim betalis, or hameid b'miktsas chayiv shvua. Someone that admits, let's say, I owe you 500. When you claim 1,000, you have to swear. You have to take a vow. You have to take an oath. Say that that's the case. So that's a seichel. It's a particular seichel with parameters. Ratzon, each ratzon is a different ratzon, but it's all the ratzon of the king. So it's all the ratzon of the nefesh. So there's a difference between ratzon and seichel. But that's not the main thing he wants to emphasize. He says loizul bulvad, that the way the gili of different desires from the power of desire is different than the different ideas, or from the power of ideas, the power of intellect. Ela avzos, but in addition to that, ela av gamzos shekoyach harotzen habom koyach harotzen haatzmi hanatua mushish be'etzem hanefesh ein b'derech nivdel mamenu. That the power of desire that comes from the atzmi, hanatua mushush, remember the third higher level, the way desire is rooted and embedded, implanted in etzem hanefesh, is not nivdel memenu. It's not separate from it. So remember, seichel we said was clearly separate. to compare a specific idea or understanding, even to the koyach hamaskil, that let alone to the soul's capacity for intellect, is nivdal, it's removed. He says, Ratzon, it's not removed. What does that mean? So he's going to explain. So he's going to go back now and say that just like we discussed earlier with Seichel, that there's Yosher and Chezer, he's now going to do the same thing with Ratzon. So it makes this a little more complicated, but let's just bear with this. He's going to explain that Ratzon too has two types of Ratzon. A Ratzon that comes, Yosher, you desire something. There's no resistance. Then there's another Ratzon that comes through resistance. And that's going to be a Ratzon of Chezer. The first Ratzon is going to reach into the Koyach HaRatzon, like Koyach HaNelam, the capacity to have desire, but it's not the deepest level. And the Ratzon of Chezer is going to reach into the Atzmi. And then he's going to come back and say that it's not Nivdal and not removed. So this is the discussion now. So he's not going to say, Tehine, Gam b'koyach harotzen. So we'll get back to the Nivdal. I didn't explain it yet. Just bear, and he's going to go, Tehine, because now, Gam b'koyach harotzen, yesh beis drachim. Also on the power of desire, like we spoke about the power of intellect, there's two ways, there's two paths, two methods. K'moy b'darkei haskola, like we spoke about the two methods and two ways in darkei haskola, and the way ideas are generated. And what is it? V'hu rotzen der yosher, v'rotzen der chezer. There's a rotzen of yosher, meaning a direct desire, and an yosher, a rotzen that comes through a bounce back, so to speak, on the rebound. The rotzen der chezer, rotzen yosher is very straightforward. Every time you desire something, you want to learn Torah, you want to go to shul, you want to daven, you want to take a walk. This is rotzen yosher. Something in your soul desires something, it expresses itself in a desire, then you go implement it. What's Ratzon of Chezer, however? In Seichel, we said Chezer was questions and contradictions and challenging to dig and probe deeper. But what's Ratzon of Chezer? So he says like this, Hu kamoi Ratzon haba b'hechrech. Example for it is like a Ratzon that comes compelled. You're forced to want something. You don't want it initially, or at least on a certain level, and something compels you to want it. Something outside. Remember, we spoke about outside. Just like with the striking of the flintstone or the fanning of the coal, they don't come on their own. It comes through an effort. So it's true, the fanning of the coal is an effort that's yosher more, because it's a flame that's there, except it's concealed. But if you want to reach into the deepest part, the only way is to strike, and striking is from the outside. It's like from an outside force. Something has to compel it. What is that? The questions, the challenges. If you didn't have those questions that would challenge the initial idea, you would never get, if you wouldn't strike basically the idea, you have to strike it. You have to challenge it. So now he's going to explain what is the Chezer of Ratzon. So it's going to be a Ratzon that initially would not have wanted something, but something compels it, something from outside forces you to want it. And we learned this in Ayin Beis already, so you may remember what he said, but we're going to learn it inside now, a little more detail. Abba b'hechrech, aval derech. What's a Ratzon abba b'hechrech? Bring the halacha. There's a halacha in the second chapter in Hilchos Gedushin. The Rebbe brings it below in the footnote here. Aval derech, keifen neisei ache yemer reitzani. That Bezdin forces someone until he says, I want. The Bezdin paskins that a person should do something. He's not willing to do it. He says, no. They come, keifen neisei. Keifen means literally compel him. They force him until he says, I will do it. Sherotzen zeh haba b'kfiyah. This desire that comes by being compelled, by being forced, hu bam harotzen ha'atzmi. That's coming from the Ratzon Atzmi. So let me stop for a moment before we read on. Because it's obvious, as the Rambam makes it clear, a get mu'usa, is a get. You cannot force a husband to give his get to his wife. It has to be willing. It has to be at his own volition. And yet, so the Rambam asks a question, so how could you have a din, say? He's saying, no, I don't want to do it. So here an interesting halacha. Because a Jew wants to do Torah mitzvahs, which means he wants to follow what Bezdin says, what the Torah says. And it's the Yitzrei who sha'on say. It's the Yetzer Hara that's forcing him not to do what his real desire is. So there's only one way to get there. His Yetzer is now in control of him, which means his Ratzon Goli is controlled by his Yetzer. So how do you get to the Ratzon Atzmi that really wants to do what God wants? There's only one way. You have to force him. You're not forcing him. You're forcing to eliminate the obstacle that was not him to reveal the true him. And that's why Reitzani is not compelled. It's not Mu'usa, because it's really what he wants. Now, what's unique about this halacha is, if that's the case, you could say that about everything. You could say everything. Every Jew wants to do every Torah. The truth is, in a way, yes. But not every halacha says keifinese. Halachas say, like, for example, the whole approach that the Rebbe taught us to educate, inspire Jews to do mitzvahs, you don't do it through force. You do it through inspiration. And the attitude is the same thing. A person really wants to do it. But he has a Yetzer Hara, or Tinuk Shenishba, or he's ignorant. So even though it's not kaifin in the conventional sense, you force him, but also you have to dig deeper to reach a Jew who was not brought up with Yiddishkeit. You also have to do something that, I don't want to use the word compel, but also requires some deeper exertion. You have to dig deeper in yourself, dig deeper in the person until you access that part of the soul. Just trying to explain it a little in more contemporary terms. But here, he's saying clearly, hechrech kfiyah, but it's not true kfiyah because you're reaching, is the only way to reach his ratzon ha'atzmi. If, for example, Bezdin would say, you know what, he doesn't want, okay, what could we do? Then what happens is you never really reach what he really wants. You let him do whatever he wants to his own destruction, to his own detriment, when the truth is he really does want. So in this case, keifinese. That's what he says. Like similar to the striking of the flintstone to get something out of it that it doesn't have ostensibly. It's there, but it can only be accessed by striking it with force. So he says like this. This ratzon that comes b'kfiyah is coming from ratzon ha'atzmi, from a deeper core ratzon. And that's why it helps by something that needs to be al pitera, l'ritzeinei dafka. Because if it wasn't his ratzon ha'atzmi, then a get needs to be ritzeinei. Then it's not, you can't play a game like this. If it really doesn't want, if his ratzon ha'atzmi, let's for argument's sake, does not want to do it, there's no way you can't force him because this thing apitera needs ratzon. So you have to say that it's his true ratzon, or else the forcing does not have any impact, cannot be used. I'm just wondering, why then do they not use this today when they say in a court of law, let's say a religious man is told by the court that they'll put you in prison if you don't give a get. If his ratzon atzmi is really to give it, apitera, so why do we say that's not good? Why can't we say that they're forcing him as well? Because maybe it's not a Bezdin, because it's a non-Jewish court.
I don't remember clear, but I think the Rambam is talking there about a different, if it's a Jew or not a Jew. Not clear, but he's mentioning something though.
Okay, we can look it up.
When it says in Hilchos Malachim and Rambam that one of the criteria for Mashiach is that he'll Yaakov call Yisrael Lelech Ba Lechadek Bitka. That kafiyah, that is also which level are we talking about? Is it only derech noam but derech shalom as the Rebbe talks about, or could you also?
Yeah, the Rebbe speaks as kfiyah b'dvarim. It means inspiration. You also say the same expression in Sof Perek Ches in Hilchos Malachim, the end of chapter 8, about Sheva Mitzvos B'nei. It also says kefin. Yeah. So the Rebbe explains that kefin, there's different levels of kefin. There's a thing called kfiyah b'dibur, which means through inspiration, through speaking to someone, you like convince them, you persuade them. Not kaifin could be also b'rediyah. You could be kaifin also with striking someone, with the actual makas. But there he's definitely not talking like that. Talking about kaifin b'dvarim. But bottom line is that, and it's a different discussion because this is a different inyan altogether. So here, that's why it helps. The kfiyah helps. Because Alpitator has to be with his. When it comes to other things, you can, for example, Bezdin can force someone to do different things. But there, not necessarily doesn't have to have rotzen. Sometimes Bezdin has the power to impose upon people, let's say, a tax or some other things. But here, the Teira Dafka wants it at Sene. We know it has to be berotzen. Ukamoy beget, like by a get. So how is it being accomplished through force? So because of Rambam, so the Rambam writes, I mean, it's all the Rambam, but the way he's writing, because of Rambam, the ma'acher shal piter hu tzorech lirtzes. Because according to Teira, he needs to tzorech lirtzes. He needs to desire this. I think the Lashon Rambam is more than tzorech lirtzes. I think it says there, kol odem b'Yisrael reitze laseis masher koser b'Teira v'lei laver. It says both things. I forgot the exact Lashon. But here, the Frierdiker Rebbe is writing, hu tzorech lirtzes. Okay, regardless, he's saying he needs the desire. Hine be'emes, the achas al piteru hu tzorech lirtzes, hine be'emes hu reitze. Since he needs to desire it, that's why in the truth he does desire it. It's interesting. Does he say that in the Rambam? Tzorech lirtzes? I'll look it up and I'll get back to you. But regardless, so in truth is he does want. The kol inyan shwal piteda, because everything, every inyan, every matter that's according to Teira, every individual Jew, due to his etzem nefesh, his core soul, he desires it. Everything that's in Teira, a Jew desires. So then the kfiyah, the compelling, the imposition, the force, it brings the rotzen goli, which comes from the rotzen atzmi that he really wants. I mean, the Rambam adds also, which I'm not sure, but I mean, I'll just say it because it's geschmacker. The Frierdiker Rebbe, I guess, doesn't bring the whole picture. He just cites it, but Rambam also says, because Yitzre hu she'onse. It's the other way around. The Yetzer is the one that forced him, is holding him hostage, not to do what he really wants. So just because he's saying, I don't want, it doesn't mean that he doesn't really want. It means that there's a Yetzer that told him. It's like, there's the case of the Stockholm syndrome. People get kidnapped, and then in some way they get attached to their captor. And later, when they try to free them, they say they want to be freed. I want to stay kidnapped. I want to stay hostage. So we know it's a psychological syndrome. It's not that they really want. Something happens to you. You become dependent. You see yourself as worthless, whatever the analysis is. So they can scream from today till tomorrow, they don't want to be free, but every human being wants to be free.
Yeah, we have an Eved free
as an example. So the bottom line is the fact that he's saying, I don't want to give the get, is going against what every Jew wants to do, what it says in Teira. So B'meila, the kfiyah is not forcing him to do something that he doesn't want to do. It's forcing the revealed Ratzon, which at this point is controlled by some other force, and allowing the Ratzon Atzmi to emerge. And this was only possible by kfiyah, because on its own, it would not have emerged because the person is being held hostage.
How do we know? I mean, even with that example about free Eved servant mentality or whatever, we have an Eved Ivri that wants to stay by his master, and they give Torah gives reshus for the.
Okay, so you know what? Eliminate the Stockholm syndrome example and just stick to the Rambam. I gave an example that works, but if we're going to start analyzing my example, it's not good because the example is not in the mimer. I don't want to defend my example. If my example doesn't work for you, just discard it. No big.
What about the one? What about
No
the one
big
even
issue.
with? What about the one with the get? How does Beis Din determine? With tzedakah, you can force a person to give 10% because that's the halacha. It's a clear passionate thing. But with a get, it's really, isn't it? It's the how do they determine that
What
the
do you mean?
person he has?
Teda, there's a din teda. They see
Yes.
the man, they see the woman, they hear all the issues, and they paskin that he should give a get because she deserves a get. Whatever. We're talking about honest rabbis. Are you talking about? You maybe
No. Honest rabbis. You mean they just poskin that they've made a decision that this relationship is untenable and that they poskin?
That's why the Torah has a thing called a get. Before you give a get, you go to a rav. People don't give get just if a husband and wife come to a rav. If a husband and wife come to a rav, the rav will listen to everybody's thoughts, and then we'll say the bezdin will paskin. Now he says, I don't want to listen. I don't want to give a get, and the bezdin feels you should give a get. Obviously, if they don't think you should give a get, there's no reason to compel anything. Then there's no. They feel they should stay married. That's not the case in this halacha. So now the only way is through kfiyah. So that kfiyah, that striking, so to speak, that effort, is example of chayzer that brings out a deeper rotzen that would not have been elicited. It's similar. He's still going to bring another example of rotzen of Kabbalah sale. So let's continue here. That's not good. But rotzen atzmi. It comes from the
notwithstanding the Rambam, but la halacha, not every time Bezin says that he should give a get, will they enforce it? That's a separate.
That's another story. But we're talking about the Rambam now.
Because well, he was asking, Eliezer Gold was asking, because the halacha, the Rishonim that argue on this Rambam, not always do they do a kfiyah.
But we're talking about the case here. We're talking about keifanese when the bezdin is keifanese at shemeretzani, that they are compelling him. We're not talking about other cases now. We're talking about this case. Okay, so this brings out a rotzen atzmi. The Rebbe brings this Rambam very often regarding the real desire of a id. Like in the words of Ayin, a id doesn't want, not he can and doesn't want to ever be torn away, agudis and phenelikus. Now he's going to give another example of a rotzen behechrich, a rotzen that's coming, chayzer rotzen, that's reaching deeper into the person, into the rotzen atzmi. V'cheinu ba'aveda, the harotzen haba b'derech Kabbalah sel, hu bo maharotzen atzmi dafke. And same thing as a rotzen in Aveda. What we spoke is more of halacha, practical halacha. Now you're saying same thing in Aveda, the rotzen that comes b'derech Kabbalah sel, which means it's not a logical, rational decision. I want something. I want to do what Hashem wants. Your Kabbalah sale, you're accepting God's yoke, creates the rotzen. So he says that too comes from the rotzen atzmi. Because if it's something you want on your own, so to speak, then again, it's like Eir Yashar. It's a rotzen nelam, a concealed power of desire, koyach harotzen, that now is revealed. But if it's a rotzen that requires an additional ingredient called Kabbalah sale, that means that you're imposing, you're saying, I want it because that's what God wants, and I'm ready to subjugate myself to that, which is essentially the concept of Kabbalah sale. Not do because I like it or I'm drawn to it. It's because Kabbalah says, like the Rambam says, the Eibishter said, in other words, I want it. But what should I do? The Eibishter says I shouldn't want it. So basically you're deferring through Kabbalah sale. He says that also comes from the rotzen atzmi. So here now he's going to introduce another force. It's called das hanelam. We learned this in Ayin Beis. I explained it there, but I'll just go over it here briefly. Vuhu. So what is this power? How could you overpower rotzen? If you don't want something, or you do want something, and here you bring a Kabbalah sale has seemingly more strength to overpower the regular desire you have, he says it comes from a level called Vuhu B'chinas das hanelam, shebenefesh. Das hanelam, briefly, das, we know from Tanya, is from the word hiskashrus. When you really bind yourself to something, completely connected. So chokhmah bina das, chokhmah is the idea. Bina is the comprehension, but it doesn't mean yet that it's become one with you, where you're really completely internalized and integrated the idea. Hiskashrus is when it becomes mamish one with you. So das hanelam is a level called das hanelam. It's a level usually rooted in keser, which is where Ratzon also hangs out. Das hanelam is like a concealed form of hiskashrus that when you bind yourself through Kabbalah sale, let us say like the chassid that came to the Alter Rebbe. He was a big scholar. He could have been a great Rosh Yeshiva. The Alter Rebbe tells him to become a Balagola. Become a Uber driver. The Uber of that time. A wagon driver. To deal with horses. And all that horses are involved. Driving people. Now, yes, of course, he could think Torah, but he has to be focused. You can imagine what kind of effort did it require for him to become a Balagola. It came from one thing, his kashrus to the Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe said so. He realized the Alter Rebbe knows the mission of his life better than he does. So his Das HaNelam activated the Kabbalah Sale, or the other way around, the Kabbalah Sale activated the Das HaNelam, and it overpowered his Ratzon Goli. His Ratzon Goli would be to sit in Beis Medrash and learn Torah. But this deeper connection was elicited due to the Das HaNelam that connected him, and therefore he overrode his Ratzon Goli and reached his Ratzon Atzmi, what he says. Das HaNelam shebenefesh lekasher atzmei, word lekasher. Gam bedavar shemitzad keiches hagluim ein reitza. He should connect himself to something, even to a thing that was good due to his keiches gluim. If you looked at his revealed faculties, I mean his conscious state, he would not want it. Why would a Talmud Chacham like him want to become a Balagol? Just using it as an example. But this Mekasher Atzmei overrode the Ratzon, the fact that he didn't want it on a Golidika level. V'nasa Meloi Reitza L'Reitza. And it transforms from not wanting to wanting. From a not desire to a desire. Page 121. V'adarabah. And on the contrary, not only is it equal to a regular desire, he's going to say now, Harotzen haba b'derech Kabbalah Seil hu acher kach. Once it emerges, initially you're forcing yourself, but once that Ratzon comes, becomes afterwards, it becomes betekef, haizgalus, benefesh, an intense revelation in the soul, har b'yeser, much more, ma'arotzen hagoli. Then the revealed Ratzon that initially came, meaning a yasher in a regular fashion, the regular desire you would have. If, for example, the Alter Rebbe told him, go become a Rosh Yeshiva, a Mashpia, and teach, it's not a Chezer. There's no resistance. Then a yasher, he's feeling a desire, very good directive. He may have even done it himself without the Alter Rebbe, because that's what his nature was. That's what he desires. But this so-called desire that comes and overrides, in a sense, like the questions in Seichel that challenge the initial idea, and it elicits a deeper idea, this now reveals a koyach Ratzon Atzmi, because it can only come from a Ratzon Atzmi. It wouldn't come from the Ratzon Goli. Ratzon Goli, that's not what this person would usually desire, left to his own accord. So what it did was it reached a Ratzon Atzmi. Obviously, this example is a positive one. The Keifanei say he's saying no due to the Yetzer and so on. But the same idea, it reaches into a deeper place. The resistance causes reaching into the Ratzon Atzmi. V'tama dovaru, and what's the reason?
It's not such a positive one, because this Moshel with Rabbi Yosef Balagola, he had a very hard time with that, but eventually he did.
Okay, fine. I understand. Okay. I meant positive. It's not a Yetzer Hara thing where he doesn't want to follow Bezdin. Here it's more resistance because his nature is not like that. But okay, fine. I'm not saying it came easy. No. In other words, if you want to see the iskashus of someone to a Rebbe, or iskash with someone to the Eibishter, put them in hot water, put them in a situation that they're not comfortable. When they're comfortable, you can't know. Maybe it's coming because you like it. But if you want to see real iskashus, you have to put them in a situation where on their own they would never do it. But because that's what you were told, Kabbalah sale, you do it. That means the connection is on an atzmizdika level. Not just as an aside, maybe it's not an aside, Chassidus applied maybe. I sometimes compare this to pre and post Gimel Tammuz. Pre Gimel Tammuz, even though we all know, I always tell Bochrim who tell me what it was like back then. So I always tell them, first of all, let me tell you something. We had a Yetzer Hara then too. They think almost like we were living like without a Yetzer Hara. That's number one. Number two, the difference is then the Giluyim were shining. It didn't take a lot of effort to come Simchas Torah and dance with the Rebbe. It was very geschmack, to be very honest. It was enjoyable, it was uplifting, it was transcendent, everything we experienced. Or other such things. Because when the light is shining brightly, we riding on the Rebbe's coattails, so to speak, and we're lifted on the Rebbe's wings, a fabrengen and so on. I'm not saying it wasn't difficult to understand the Rebbe and to learn. It's always Aveda. But there was a certain element of it that did not necessarily challenge you to your core. I mean, I can't say that and completely, I want to correct myself. There are many people who changed their lives as a result of the connection. So I'm not going to say that entirely. But it was relatively, there were giluyim to hold on to. Let's put it that way. When someone today has to make a commitment, am I going to do what I want to do, or am I going to do what the Rebbe wants me to do? There's more resistance, let's be honest, because you don't have quite the giluyim. The Rebbe didn't tell it to you in Yechidus. You're not hearing it directly. It's not like you're getting kiruvim and the Rebbe calling you and calling up on you. You can always call on the Rebbe for... Now you have to rely much more on Amunah and Kabbalah Sale, that this is the shlichus. But when you do that, you definitely reach much more of an atzmizdika connection and rotzen, then both in you and the connection, then when it's so-called comes with a little easier. Now, of course, we'd prefer to have the one with the Giluyim. Why would we want this? But after the fact, the fact is it brings out a deeper rotzen atzmi. I mean, I would say the same thing on a general level, the difference between people who are FFBs and what we call kavyachol bali tshuva and FFBs. I hate those terms. I'm just using it for cultural reasons. But what is the difference? Someone grew up with it, comfortable. It's their culture. What effort? What do you give up already? You grew up. You never ate basar b'chalav, chaz v'shalom. Shabbos was natural. It's not just that it's nice. It's also easy. Someone who did not have that option, who grew up without it and had to give up things in life, real things, whether it's financially or comforts or just in general to live a life as they see fit, that no question reaches into the more etzem neshama because of that resistance. There's no question about it. That's why the ultimate bracha tat tzaddik is lasovet tzaddikai b'tiyufta, that Moshiach also lasovet tzaddikai will come to cause tzaddikim to do tshuva. Tshuva on what? They didn't sin because their avodah is with giluyim. They don't have that atzmizdika connection necessarily. So that's an interesting statement. Mashiach is going to come to cause that also tzaddikim should have that element of connection to atzmi that comes through resistance. Like the Baal Shem Tov teaches on Tzomelecha Nafshi, Kamelecha Psari. Came by Kedesh Chazisicha. So he says, Tzomelecha Nafshi, my soul is thirsty for you, and my spirit, my flesh rather, is pining. And came by Kedesh Chazisicha, that also when I come by Kedesh, I should also see you. So what does that mean? Sama is not b'kedesh. Sama is when you're thirsty. So that Baal Shem Tov teaches, Kain b'kedesh, halavai b'kedesh chazisicha. That just as I thirsted for you with passion, when I was thirsty, so should it be when I'm b'kedesh, I should also desire to be connected with you with the same passion. Because when you're b'kedesh, when things are, you're dwelling in a holy domain, you don't have that passion. to reach for it because you don't feel thirsty. So he's saying you should have the same thirst even when you're Bakedish. It's a tremendous word in general. I'm just applying this a bit to other scenarios. Not exactly what I said, everything the point, but the point is that this reaches to Atzmi. So he says, V'tam ha'davarhu. And the reason for this is why it's stronger when it comes on erchez, on the rebound. In other words, through a challenge or through something compelling it, is lefisha ratzon the Kabbalah sale, because the ratzon of Kabbalah sale, not the ratzon that you initially want on your own. That Kabbalah sale is so-called compelling you to connect to it. Coming from the highest level of the desire that's in the potential and core state of the soul. Not just the keich harotzen hanelam. The giluyim misham him dafke bekeich erchezer. The giluyim from there is only accessible through erchezer, through a force that comes, so to speak, from outside of it. A force that is compelling that rotzen to emerge. Erchezer. Er yashar is the regular flow. Your nefesh wants something. Well, let's say your nefesh doesn't want something, so that das hanelam and the Kabbalah sale, so to speak, overrides what you want, reaches deeper in, erchezer, to the keich yulia atzmi, to draw out like striking the flintstone in that example. Even though the example was used on seichel, but similar idea. That you need that effort. This, by the way, is how Chassidus explains the Kaf Aleim HaKigigis. It says by Matan Torah, which is one of the reasons we have a chuppah by a wedding, is the Eibishter took the mountain, Mount Sinai, he lifted it upon them like a canopy, and said, if you receive the Torah, fine. If not, I'll drop the mountain on you. So the obvious question is, what does that mean? Well, you're forcing them to take the Torah. Didn't they say Nasav and Nishma? We laud the Jewish people that they weren't like the other nations who first wanted to see what it says in Torah, if it's convenient or not. And when they saw it says like Signev, like Sitzach, like Sachmed, etc., they rejected it. It wasn't for them. The Eden, on the other hand, Nasav and Ishma, we'll do, and then we'll ask or understand and listen. And suddenly you need Kaf Aleim. So there's different answers given for this. Some say the Kaf Aleim was for Torah Sheb'al Peh. Some say that the Eibishter was making sure that just in case, the Taka said they want, but maybe once they see, they may regret. And even the Gemara says that's the reason that Purim is Kimu v'Kibla Yehudim, because the Jews could always say, 1 second, we didn't want it on our own volition. You forced us. You lifted the mountain on top of us. I don't know if a chassan could say the same thing in a kala, that, hey, you put the chuppah upon us, you forced us. I don't know if you could apply it to that, but I'm just thinking out loud. So comes the Gemara and says, that's why Purim, kimu v'kiblu, kimu mashakiblu kfar. That this time by Purim, they were not forced. They did it with their own ratzon. So you see, what does this mean? So Chassidus explains, the Alter Rebbe explains in Tereh that the Kaf Aleim HaKigigis was love, was the Gili of Ava Rabbah. It's true, they committed as much as they could commit, the Jewish people. But the Eibishter wanted the commitment to be, in a sense, consummated. It was like an embrace. It wasn't a kafah forcing them that because they don't want it. It was revealing a deeper connection between the Eibishter and the Eden. So you still have to explain. So what does it mean, the ultimatum, that if you don't accept it, I'll drop the mountain on top of you? That needs to be explained. I don't remember I don't think Tereir answers that question. But the bottom line is that's what it's seen as a deeper connection. But you could explain according to this, that's what it means. The Kaf Aleim was essentially because in case their Yetzer Hara somewhere would suddenly say, no, I don't necessarily want this, the Eibishter made sure that the Ratzon Atzmi should be revealed. That's probably the explanation. So the ultimatum was for the Yetzer Hara. In case, remember, they did build a Chet Egel afterwards. So they didn't completely destroy the Yetzer Hara, even though Poska Zumasan, but nevertheless, there was potential. So it could be that's the way you explain it. But I think according to this, it actually adds very geschmack. It's
That's
What?
If Bosco's a Mason, it needs explanation. They said
Yeah, but
the Erev Rav, but still.
no, but it could be the explanations because that threat was for the Yetzer Hara, that the like the Keifanesi Hachemaretz and by the get. Could be. Anyway, interesting topic, right? Okay, so where are we here? Now it continues. So therefore, it's coming dafke be'er chezer. We'll move on, and it's understood. The Eifen Gili Harotzen Hurak Masharotzen Nimtze Mekei Harotzen Ayuli Atzmi. Now he's going to go the other side. This does not mean, he wants to say, that I'll read the next line, then you'll see what he means with this line. So now that we've established, I'll explain it and then we'll read it inside again. Now that we've established that through Chezer, in this case, the examples he gave was B'derech Hechrech, something that compels and reaches deeper inside of the individual. You know, I just want to give another example, just makes it a little, for me, this example works very well. The other way around. What did Moshe accomplish in Yom Kippur? After 80 days of praying to God, Salachti Kidvarecha. What the Eibishter didn't love the Jews by Matan Torah, we just besprayed, he loved them. The Eden then went and built the Egel. Moshe goes up for 80 more days to beg for forgiveness. 40 days, 2 sets of 40 days. What did he achieve there? What was he looking for? The Eibishter said to him, start a new nation. They messed up, let's start anew. No. So, but pastors, Moshe understood, as a good shatchin as he was, between the Eden, that the Eibishter truly loves the Eden. The Eden loved the Eibishter. A terrible sin was committed. No one's denying that. Infidelity, literally cheating and violating the marriage of Chasana between Hashem and the Eden. They built the golden calf, another god. But Moshe knew that the love is there, but it's on such an atzmizdika level, you need to work hard to get there. And the Eibishter didn't make it easy for him because on Giluyim, Hashem said very simple, what should I do? Did I do this to them? 39 days after they heard, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, v'lo yilecha elekim acherim, they went ahead and made elekim acher. There's cause and effect in this world, which means reward and punishment. You put your hand in fire, you get burned. They cut off from me. I didn't do anything. What do you want from me? I'm paraphrasing what Hashem most likely said. And Moshe said, no, I don't take no for an answer. Erase my name from the Torah. He shattered the tablets earlier. As the Rebbe explains, the famous Simchas Torah Mem Zayin Fabrengen. The Rebbe was crying. Why did he shatter the tablets? Because it's like the ksuba. It's the contract. The Eden heard La Yilacha, but they didn't yet receive it, which was like signing the contract. So he had like a so-called a loophole. But Moshe wasn't playing games. He knew that the Kesher Atzmi, the Ava Atzmis between Eden and Hashem and vice versa, Hashem to Eden, was unbreakable. But he knew that he's going to have to work very hard to get there. He would never have gotten there without the Chet HaEgel. So Chassidus actually asks the Samach Vov and other places, Chet HaNisker? After Chet HaEgel, they got Shuvah in Yom Kippur, they get the Luchas Shnias, which was greater in some ways than the first Luchas. Through it, the Gemara says we got the Torah Shabbat Peh, and Shas, and Medrash, and Agoda, and so on. So the answer is exactly this. No, that's not because they sinned. It forced Moshe to have to dig deeper, to reach the Eibishter, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, which were only revealed because of the sin. It would never have been revealed had Moshe not asked. Hareini noch v'edecha. Moshe's request for the Eibishter to show him his face. What was he interested? He was curious to see God's face because he wanted to reach Atzmus. He wanted to reach a place that a human being cannot see because he knew that's the only place that he can find redemption for the Eden. Because as long as he goes to Giluyim, it's not enough. He wanted Ponai. We talked about this a number of times. Upona lo yiro, but it says Upona you access through lo yiro, by not looking. But that's an aside. So he wanted to reach the deepest levels because he knew that's the only place where there'll be salvation, where there'll be tshuva. And what does he do? He achieves that, and that's why Yom Kippur is the Yema Atzmi, Yem Echad, Achaz Bashana, Yechida, Etzem HaNefesh, the fifth level. Everything we know about Yom Kippur, why is it the holiest day? Like we say in the beginning, after Kol Nidre, Salachti Kidvarecha. Because it's the only time in history a man prevailed over God in such a dramatic way. Because he reached, not the Eibishter suddenly gave up. I said, and gave in. Okay, you know what? You want me to forgive them? I'll forgive them. No. The Eibishter saw that Moshe's love for him, for Hashem, and for the Eden was so deep, it reached the Etzem itself, which can only come al mata lamayla er chezer. So Shvu is matan teira is er yashar. Yeah, the Eibishter gave teira to the. Yes, it came after Yitzias Mitzrayim, Sfiras Eimer, but Yom Kippur is the ultimate er chezer. Completely through the darkest state. You have to go through the 3 weeks and the 9 days and Tisha B'Av and all the destruction, everything that brought. Remember, the first Tisha B'Av was the Meraglim, etc. And Yom Kippur becomes the most powerful day, the holiest day. And Simchas Torah is actually the revelation of dancing of Yom Kippur. As Chassidus explains why we don't dance by Shavuos like we do on Simchas Torah, because this Simcha is already Simchas HaEtzem. You reach into the Hakofis all the way into the Etzem HaNefesh. I'm just using that because it's something that we're much more familiar with, but it's essentially this idea. Again, it's not exact. There's probably some differences, but the point is that Er Chezer reaches into the Atzmi. Now comes the other side of the coin. If that's the case, so then you could say, you know what? It's a flow, fine. The Etzem HaNefesh, or in this case, Koyach HaYuli HaAtzmi Shebenefesh, just using the words he says here, let me just, Koyach HaRotzen HaYuli HaAtzmi. So then it seems it's accessible, and it's flowing from there into Rotzen Goli. It required Er Chezer. He says, no. That's not the case. It's still removed. That's what he's going to say. Umuvan, that's the Umuvan now. Umuvan, that's understood. That the way Rotzen comes revealed, Hurak Masharotzen Nimtze Mekeach HaRotzen HaYuli Atzmi. It only emerges from there. V'loisha Koyach Atzmi Hu B'chinas Mokerei Love. It's not the pshat that the Koyach Atzmi HaYuli in the Etzem HaNefesh becomes a source for it, like Ilav Olol, like a cause and effect. In other words, what Moshe achieved, let's say through Yom Kippur, through the Tshuva Yom Kippur, is not something. It's a regular process. Okay, now it's all you got to do is open up the inner channels, and you access the etzem. The etzem always is removed. However, this level of Rotzen Atzmi is revealed through the Er Chezer. So Moshe was able to reach that deepest place, but it's not that pshat that deepest place is accessible in the regular conventional word, so to speak. So on one hand, it's not a mocker. You cannot say, for example, you can't say echte v'ashuv. I will sin, and then I'll just go and reach the etzem and access it. And you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. The Alter Rebbe says, im dochak v'nichnas, that if you really work hard, you can do it. But that's only because you overrode the echte v'ashuv. Echte v'ashuv is a sin. The dochak means you do tshuva even on that sin, so you're able to reach it. But it's not a conventional place to go. In other words, Er Chezer does not eliminate the power of Er Yosher. The regular conventional way is like in Seichel, Koyach HaMaskil to Seichel, Koyach HaRotzen to Rotzen. However, in these circumstances, where Rotzen goes all the way into the deepest part, which comes through Er Chezer, so it merges, that's the word I want to use. You could say you're accessing it, but not in a derech mocker. It still remains beyond us. But through the Er Chezer, you're able to draw out from there. So it goes both ways, this Rotzen. On one hand, the Rotzen is still not, they're separate from each other. I'm sorry, not separate. It's ein areich to one another, but the way the Rotzen emerges, the way the Rotzen comes from the Rotzen Atzmi, is not in a form that's removed. If even though the koyach, the core faculty of Ratzon, is removed from him, but the way the Ratzon is revealed is not removed. And the reason for this is, V'tamad, I'm going to explain in a minute. Let me just read inside. V'tamad davar, and the reason for this is, Li is the klolos koyach Ratzon, einei koyach shachutz la'atzmas hanefesh. The reason for this is because Ratzon, the general power, faculty of desire, is not a power, a faculty that's outside of the core soul. Al kain, hine mitziyuse, mena etzem hu gam kein lebe b'chinas richuk. And that's why the way it emerges from the etzem is not in the form of richuk, of distance. Now, these words on their own, I'm sure you're all asking, what does this mean? What does this mean? Now, I explained it when we learned Ayin Beis, and it's interesting that here, the Frierdiker Rebbe does not add any words. This is almost word for word from Ayin Beis, with just a few small changes. So let me go over what I explained when we learned it in Ayin Beis, and tell you how I understand this. It's a pretty dense piece. You know, the first half, the Atzmi, is one thing. But what is this thing with Nivdal and not Nivdal? Is it Be'erech, not Be'erech? So my understanding is as follows. And let's contrast it again with Seichel. Seichel too, through effort, right? Hakah, striking the flintstone, you access sparks that are in the stone, but are they actually in the stone? No, they're not. To say sparks and a flintstone are commensurate to each other, no. In a coal, the flame is there, but it's concealed. So you can't say, you could say there's two separate entities, the coal and the flame, but the flame is existent. So the revealed flame, when you fan it, and the concealed flame are not that distant from each other. When it comes to the flintstone, he said there were three differences on top of page 120. I think this is very vital to help us understand this. The three differences, I'll just repeat them. That in the coal, the flame exists. In the flintstone, it does not exist. In the flame and the coal are two separate things. In the flintstone, they're one, because there's no flame, there's no sparks. So whatever the stone is, that's what the sparks are so-called within the stone itself. And the third difference is that by the coal, the flame comes out bursting like a flame, and in the flintstone comes out sparks. It sparks, not as a flame. And that's exactly why to access the sparks in the flintstone requires a lot more effort, because they're not existent. How does it apply to the nefesh now? I'm going to make the distinction between, first we'll talk about Seichel, and then Ratzon, and you'll see how he explains it. In Seichel, when you're reaching the coal, so to speak, that requires effort, but it's like fanning the coal because the Seichel is there, it's just concealed. I should correct myself. Koyach HaMaskil is not Seichel, but it's the power, the source of intellect. So through some effort, like he explained, the first person who learns a sugya, understands it well, he goes over it once, twice, effort, he fans the flame of his Koyach HaMaskil, and now he has a good understanding of the idea. What happens on level 2, Chayzer of Seichel? No, that's not enough. You start asking questions, you challenge it, you strike it. What are you striking? More than just a call. You're striking the koyach etzem hayuli, seichel etzem hayuli and atzmi, and then sparks come. They don't come like a flame, they come like sparks, because it's not there, there's no seichel there. But when you access it, it gives you a far deeper understanding, qualitatively, than the regular seichel that comes from koyach hamaskil, from the kol. So, but can you say that the seichel can you say that the sparks, can you say that the sparks that come after you strike it are connected to the sparks within the stone? No, because the stone and the sparks are not existent there. They're not even a concealed spark. They're not existent. It's only when you strike it, you reach something in that source, or let's not even call it a source, and that something is the sparks that in turn enrich the idea that you could only have come through the questions of striking it. So there, both the seichel itself, the revealed idea, compared to the koyach ha'atzmi ayuli, is not only nivdal, it's shalei berech, it's infinitely distant, and the way the seichel emerges is also infinitely distant, because the seichel is a particular idea. You can't compare it to what lies within the Flintstone. When it comes to Ratzon, however, the same is true with point number one. The Ratzon, as it is in the Ratzon ha'atzmi and the way the Ratzon ha'goli, they have no comparison to each other. Because this is the etzem ha'nefesh that, let's say, desires to do Torah and mitzvahs. You can't access it on its own unless you strike. You need a kaifer nesei, or you need the Kabbalah sale, or you need what I said with Moshe, you need that deep exertion. It's the only way to reach there. Because the regular Ratzon flows. But if you want to reach a Ratzon that there's resistance, that you don't initially, in the Giluyim, you don't seem to desire it, the only way is through a very superhuman effort, basically, or a very powerful exertion, whether it's the Kaifer Nesei by the get, or whether it's the Kabbalah sale by the Ratzon, the Kabbalah sale, the Das Hanelam. You need to connect to a deeper place to access that Ratzon. So the Ratzon Goli and the Ratzon Atzmi, what would you say? They're not connected to each other. Even after the Ratzon emerges, it's still, the Atzmi doesn't remain accessible. You don't have Yom Kippur every day. You can't access the Atzmi every moment. When you put a lot of pressure, a lot of intensity, you can access it. But as he says, it's not a mocker, because it remains Atzmi. Etzem HaNefesh always remains Etzem HaNefesh. But in these instances, due to a lot of effort and exertion, you're able to access it. However, here's the big difference. Seichel, when it comes revealed, in every possible way, it remains, the Etzem remains completely removed from it. Ratzon, however, the Ratzon Goli does reflect the Ratzon Atzmi. The Seichel does not reflect the Seichel Atzmi. You just say from the Seichel Atzmi, you got a deeper understanding, so you understand it better than a person who didn't ask questions and didn't have challenges. In the Ratzon, the fact that you now say Reitzani, the person that the Bezdin was kaifa, says, I want. Or the Kabbalah sale now has caused you to want. Or the Eibishter started wanting after the Eibishter, and Shalachti Kidvarecha, the Ratzon Goli is a reflection of the Ratzon Atzmi. It's just not seen as a source, a direct source that you can access all the time, but the Ratzon Goli is nothing but a reflection of what you really want inside your nefesh. Whereas Seichel Goli, as deep as it is, so it gets strength from the Seichel Atzmi, but you can't say it's a reflection of Seichel Atzmi because there's no Seichel there altogether. And here there's a Ratzon Atzmi that you can't call a Ratzon, but the Ratzon Goli is nothing but a reflection of what a Jew really wants to do, whether it's the Kabbalah sale or it's the Kfiyah or the other examples we spoke about. But those are the two examples he's using here. So bottom line is Ratzon, therefore, is nothing but, Ratzon, therefore, desire, is nothing but reflecting the Ratzon Atzmi. It could only have emerged through exertion. In the case of Koifa, needed a compelling, something imposed, or Kabbalah sale, something stronger to force you to want that. But it's a reflection. At the end of the day, when the Eibishter forgave the Eden on Yom Kippur, even though, it's, so to speak, it came through resistance, but then it was a reflection of what he really wants. So his Ratzon Goli became a reflection of his Ratzon Atzmi. That's how I would explain this piece. And I'll stop here if somebody wants to ask anything.
The Seichel Atzmi is not, I'm talking now about the Seichel Atzmi, is not a part of the Nefesh like the Ratzon Atzmi.
He didn't say that. He didn't say that. First of all, yes, it's not the same. Yes, because the Seichel, even Atzmi, is not his Pashtus HaNefesh. Seichel's role is a particular faculty. So when it becomes a faculty outside, a faculty of Koyach Goli, you have to say even in the Nefesh, it's not the whole Nefesh. In Seichel Atzmi, it's nothing but the Nefesh. It's the Nefesh's power to have Seichel. But the Seichel, the actual Seichel idea, the function, and what he said, the poil of Seichel, its function is something that's a specific faculty. Not, that was one thing he said. The second thing he said is that it always remains removed from there because the Seichel Goli does not reflect the Seichel Atzmi. The Ratzon Goli reflects the Ratzon Atzmi. That's essentially the difference. No, but the sparks within the flintstone, the seichel atzmi, is also not really sparks. It's not even seichel really. It's the nefesh capacity, the soul's capacity to conceive of ideas. That is distant from seichel goli. Remember, the seichel, the ratzon hiyuli atzmi, the soul's capacity to desire is also removed from ratzon goli, infinitely removed. But the poel mamish ratzon, because it's not a koyach chutz l'nefesh, all it is to reflect the nefesh. So the revealed desire reflects the etzem desire. Seichel on all levels is not. That's not its role. Its role is not to reveal etzem nefesh. Its role is to be a particular faculty, but it accesses koyach seichel atzmi through kushis and halomis and what do you say? Kushis, halomis, and three things. Stiris. Perukim is answers, right? Stiris, contradictions. I will tell you, I believe it's understood. I still don't know, and I'm trying to figure out, because the example with Ratzon, does it make it easier to understand the Oyer or not? But he's clearly using it as an example. I think if we really come down to understanding what Ratzon is, because at the end of the day, Ratzon is a reflection of who you are. The problem is that in certain situations, the who you are has been concealed. So the only way to access it is through something that will compel it. It's either Koifenoi say by Hilchas Gerishin or the Kabbalah sale of Ratzon Kabbalah sale. So that's the only way to access who you really are. But once you access it, Ratzon Goli is a reflection of who you are. You're doing what your real desire, Atzmi, is. Even though on the level of Atzmi, it's completely removed. It's not a mocker for the Ratzon Goli. As a matter of fact, the Ratzon Nelim is a mocker for Ratzon Goli. Now, in the case of, let's say, Rabbi Yosef, the Bala Gola, if he would have followed his Ratzon Goli as Ratzon Nelim, he would have become a Rosh Yeshiva. But that would have been a mocker, his nefesh. The Goli wants it, and then he acts on it. To reach his Atzmi, you needed to have that whole backwards approach, a challenge, not what he initially wants. And that reveals his Atzmi. That doesn't mean, however, the Atzmi is accessible. Doesn't mean the Atzmi is a mocker. It just means it's there. And the only way to access it is through the Eir Chayzer. So therefore, bottom line is Ratzon Goli. Now, who you are is reflected in what you desire through Eir Chayzer.
Would you say that Nadarim, Hilchos Nadarim, and Shavuos is the same kind of thing of forcing yourself to reach your Ratzon Atzmi by overriding, so to speak, what you really want to do, Begiloi, and accessing your deeper Ratzon?
No, I would not say that, because by Nadarim, it says in Yerushalmi, Dayach Masha Oselecha Teira. Nadarim are not necessarily considered to be a positive thing. It says it's enough what God prohibited you. You don't have to take on new prohibitions. It's only due to certain circumstances that we take on a neder. Usually due to some type of tshuva, like the Nazir. Why he takes it on? Because Haroya has Seita B'Kulkula, as Rashi brings in Parsha Nosei. So even though after the neder, after the fact, it could bring on deeper koiches, but chatchila, you're not supposed to take on a neder on a shvua. Al pi Torah. It's only like it's a form of tshuva after the fact. So it's so you have to be. I would not compare it to that. It has differences. Is there something to be said when you impose to reach deeper? Yeah, like a person who does of an avera and then does tshuva. But he doesn't want to bring that here because he doesn't want to get into transgression here. Here he wants to talk about scenarios where you need some deeper strength to access a deeper resource. And yet that resource remains beyond you.
Are these two levels of Ratzon parallel at all to Neshama or Chaya and Yechida?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Can everyone who is not speaking, if you don't mind muting, there's some background noise.
Is it
Okay.
possible to compare the Seichel Neram and the Ratzon Neram?
Before we
hardly
continue,
talk-
one second. I see the questions you're asking are all outside questions. Everybody understands what was explained here, this piece in the Mimer, without applying it in any other scenarios or comparing it to other things you've learned. The Etzem Inyan we learned Pshat here. Is it clear or needs more explanation? That's what I would like before we go to questions of other related issues. Is it clear to everyone?
I think
Not
so.
answering, I don't know, either yes or no.
I think so. We say that our main point was that you can really have a gili reflection, Etzem Nefesh, by Ratzon, by forcing it. And it's not a gili of the Etzem Koach of Seichel when you have Hakah, when you force it. So it's a tremendous difference. It remains a Koach Nivdo. That seems to be the central idea you're presenting.
Okay, so before more questions, let me just add one more thing which may be helpful. I think it's vital to understand the difference between an etzem and a gilui. We talk about etzem very often, etzem hanefesh, giluyim, atzmus, oir. In general, etzem and gilui. I want to just talk about that for a moment. Because it's critical to get beyond semantics. Etzem and gilui are not just two words. They're completely two different states of being. Etzem, by definition, is not an accessible state. Giluyim, by definition, is all about accessibility. Because the Giluyim means it's revealed, it's expressed. You're aware of it. Etzem, by definition, is built in mispashit, built in misgala. Etzem is not expressible. It's not revealable. That's what an etzem is. So when someone asks you, what's your etzem like? The etzem, the truth is, as soon as you start describing it, you're already talking about gili mina etzem. You could say, here's what the giluyim of my etzem look like. But an etzem, by definition, is not an accessible state. Especially when you're talking about atzmus. When you're talking about atzmus, you're talking about something that's beyond everything. We'll get back to atzmus shortly, but I just wanted to make that first statement. So the question then is there a relationship? Can we ultimately access etzem when it's fundamentally not accessible? So the Eibishter created a certain feature. It's called oir. Oir is me'ena etzem, is dovuk le'etzem, is megala etzem. But what does that mean? It means that in some way, because oir is bottled to its source, to the etzem, so in some way it's reflective of it. It's still infinitely distant, but at least the concept of gili has come into language, where the mitzvah is built to mitzvahs nimtzah, or that which atzmus is completely beyond, has in some way expressed something. Now, what is expressed? That's already a matter of levels. We may know a little, we know more, then we grow. You learn that atzmus creates existence, yes, so we learn more about atzmus. But the concept is, there's such a thing called, like we said, ata haresa ladas. Du, atzmus, ein sof. You, atzmus, have revealed yourself to be known. That's a big chiddush, because an etzem on its own is not known and is not revealed. I always give the example, for example, just on a very basic level. I ask you right now, what is your left leg doing? So till I said what your left leg is doing, you weren't even thinking about it. Did it mean your left leg was not doing anything? Did you mean that your left leg didn't exist? Because consciousness itself and awareness is gilui. And a atzmi does not need gilui to be. For you to exist does not mean you need to be conscious of it. You can exist without being conscious. When a person is completely bottled, he's not conscious of himself, he's only bottled to his source. And yet, the Eibishter, the Atzmi, the Atzmus, wanted it to be expressed in some way. That's why we have atachtenim. It means in the world of Giluyim. To go to the Nefesh, we have an example for it with ourselves as well. The etzem of who you are, for all practical purposes, could have been completely isolated and separate from everyone else. Imagine God did not give us the power of speech or the power of communicating in any way. How would you and I ever connect with each other? How could we love each other? How could parent love the child? Spouses? There's no connection between them. Etzem and etzem. The etzem of you are, I'm not saying atzmos, but the etzem of you are, there's no interaction between one and another. It could have been done that way, but then there'd be no relationships, and there'd be no growth, and there'd be no avodah, and there'd be no love, and there'd be no connection. So the Eibishter said, no, I'm not just going to give everybody an etzem hanefesh, I'm also going to give them a nefesh that has power to be, has giluyim. Gilui hanefesh. Keep saying, gilui hanefesh. But what is this gilui hanefesh? Let's say we only had desire, rotzen. So we would be able to reveal, this is what I want. But you wouldn't have structure. Seichel amidus, or more specifically, chochma bina das chesed gvura teferes netzach yesed malchus, is not just that you have a gilui, but it's a poshet, a gilui poshet. Rotzen is a gilui poshet. I want, and I ask you, what do you want? I don't know what I want. I just want. To live an existence like ours, rotzen is critical because that reflects what the nefesh is. But it's also critical to have keiches hanefesh, keiches pnimim, because it tells you what the structure. What do you want? I want to use my chochma, my bina, my das, my chesed, gvura, and so on and so forth. So when you put this, so now you have the equation. You have etzem hanefesh, meaning the nefesh itself. You have the rotzen, which is gilui hanefesh. So in some ways, be megala the etzem, and then you have the actual faculties, which is you can say those are the tools, the instruments, the details of our existence. If you have seichel without rotzen, you're not going to get anywhere. If you have rotzen without seichel, you're not going to have any specifics. So rotzen in the language of Chassidus is called makif, seviv. Keiches pnimim is called mamala kalalmin, pnimi. And etzem is what's higher than makif and pnimi. So in the human being, the nefesh is the etzem, the makif is the rotzen. The truth is behind rotzen, there's tainuk, but that's not relevant to our discussion here. And then there's the keiches pnimi, the mamala. You want the etzem to be nizgala through the rotzen and then activate the pnimi. But the pnimi is, like we've been learning, is the yesh hanivra and the ayin of the yesh hanivra. The etzem and the rotzen is like the ayin of the yesh amiti, in this case the nefesh. And this now is going to be explained, also the same thing, lamaila. Atzmos is the etzem. Rotzen, in our mashal to us, is like the oir, the ayin amiti of the yesh amiti. And then comes, we're going to learn later, we're going to learn the yesh hanivra and the ayin of the yesh hanivra, which much more the faculties, connects to the specifics of existence. So just like rotzen and the etzem hanefesh, now let's compare them. Are they the same thing? No. Rotzen is a gilui, and nefesh is an etzem. But is rotzen anything but revealing what the nefesh is? No. So though technically rotzen is equally distant from the etzem hanefesh as it is, as chochma, as seichel is, and as the yesh is, in its existence, because the etzem is beyond everything. The etzem is not defined by rotzen either. But when rotzen is revealed, what is it revealing? Not a specific, it's revealing what the nefesh wants. The same thing we're going to now read about oir. That oir is infinitely distant from atzmos, ein arech. But hisavuse, the way it manifests, is loy b'derech ein arech, because it is reflecting what the nefesh wants. The oir chayzer helps us understand specifics. That the end of the day, the etzem, rotzen atzmi in the nefesh remains in an atzmizdika place. You either are revealing it or you're not revealing it. Sometimes, because it's not revealed, the only way to access it is through striking it, through kfiyah or kabbalah sale. That in turn activates something, a spark flies out of there, but it still remains it still remains an atzmi. That's not a mocker. You can't call it a mocker because it's not commensurate to rotzen. But on the other hand, rotzen is now informed by the rotzen atzmi, whereas seichel receives through exertion, through yagiyah, questions, receives the sparks from the etzem koyach atzmi hiyuli, but seichel is not a revelation of the nefesh. So therefore, seichel always remains nivdal, even in its manner of expression, because its functionality and its purpose is a specific function, not to express what the nefesh wants. I wanted to just give a little more overview of it to make it a little more understandable. I hope that was helpful.
Shikayach. That was very, very, very
Very special.
helpful.
Have a good day.
I want to
but still,
should we stop here or should I finish this piece? It's very late.
now, can we still ask that question about the middle level of
Just give me a
Ratzon?
second.
That's not finished. Let's not go through so quickly. Can you answer, we address the middle level Ratzon, what that is?
What's the question?
What is Ratzon Neram? What does it reflect? What's its purpose? How does it compare to Seichel Neram?
It's basically the level of desire before it becomes revealed. Let's say the Ratzon to build a house. Remember, we learned Ratzon, Heskem, Shakavitaria, Hachlota, and then comes, and could be for years, the Ratzon can remain concealed in your nefesh. And then comes the day that it starts being revealed, that act becomes active. That's an example of Ratzon. Ratzon hamuchled batzmusei is something that's completely removed. It's not even in a concealed state. And then there's a Ratzon. We learned 3 levels in Ratzon, if you remember. Ratzon Kloli, Ratzon Prati, Ratzon HaKodim. So bottom line is, Ratzon Nelam would be, it's there, but it's not in a full revealed way. Ratzon HaMuchlat would be, it's not there in any way you can say, it's just you were born with that Natua Umushrish, Be'etzem HaNefesh, the desire for a home.
Yeah.
Like a baby is born with it, but you can't call that a Ratzon Nelam. Ratzon Nelam would mean later in life, it suddenly it's ready to become revealed.
And Heskem, where's Heskem?
That's not relevant here. I wouldn't go there. That's too complicated to bring into here. Because Heskem, because that all is part of the Ratzon HaKloli, like you said. But that's all, yeah.
That's the deepest part we talked about.
Heskem is the place where it starts emerging before it becomes Achlota that you're going to. It's still consideration.
Yeah.
He's not going into the levels. Here he's just talking about 3 levels here. So you have to stick to Etzem, Helam, Nelam, and Koyach Atzmi, Koyach Nelam, and Koyach Goli.
So the Koch Atzmi was Hechlet, who we spoke about.
I wouldn't go there because you're asking me now a new question. You want to connect?
No,
this
you just said it. You spoke about it.
No. You asked me a question that has nothing to do with this mimer. I answered your question that's not related to this discussion here directly.
Okay, I thought you
Ask
just
me
mentioned that.
What's Ratzon Nelam? So I explained to you. Once you want to connect it here, I would stop there because I don't know. They're going to have to figure that out yourself. I don't know the connection here.
Okay.
Here, B'chlal, here he's comparing Ratzon to Eir. Remember, Ratzon earlier was a Ratzon that emerged in the Eir. So if you're going to go there, you have to discuss the difference between Eir and Ratzon. Here, Ratzon is a comparison to Eir. So here already the Ratzon has emerged. So you want to discuss now what's the difference between Eir and Ratzon. That's really where you want to go.
Okay.
So that's why I'm not going there, because that's not what he wants to say here. Here he wants to compare Eir to Ratzon. I already discussed this. I said that when you start breaking it down, Eir is higher than Ratzon. But in this case, there's a comparison because they both reflect their source.
Ratzon was a later step, of course. You'll remember.
And then in the Ratzon, you'll have levels as they get closer. The Ratzon itself, you're going to have levels that, remember the 3 different interpretations in Ayin. There's the Ratzon that is reflective of what the Baal HaRatzon wants, and then there's the Ratzon as the objective that gets involved with the details. So that's already breaking it down into the details. That's the connection to this.
All right.
Okay. So the last piece we'll learn tomorrow, which is the Oisfir, the conclusion that just like Ratzon reflects the Nefesh, and even though it's distant from the Etzem, the same, but it's not its method of expression is not distant because it's reflective of it. The same thing now, the same we're going to learn now about Eir is also the same way.
Okay. Please please sum up what you said today. We should go over it again tomorrow so we can make sure we got it. We'd appreciate it.
Okay.